Yeah, can you believe we're still in chapter 1? Not quite, as Fiona was saying, not quite the meeting we were expecting to have. So hence we're back on Zoom and back in my office. We're going to be looking tonight at Titus chapter 1 and verses 12 through to and including verse 14, which I shall read out to you. So it says, one of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. So a little bit of background to this. Cretians are people from Crete, right? And Titus's mission is that he's being sent by Paul, or has been sent by Paul to Crete to basically organize the churches that are there and to deal with any kind of problems. And I remember kind of the first time that I read this, and it probably would have been in the NIV, many years ago. And I was a bit confused when I read it, because I thought it sort of says, one of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, Cretians, that is people from Crete, are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. And I was like, well, is Paul saying this is what they say and that's obviously wrong? Or is Paul saying this is what one of their own prophets says and I'm agreeing with it? And I was a bit confused, really, because it was kind of messing a bit with my sort of postmodern sensibilities, because I was thinking, well, the Bible would only deal with people as individuals. It wouldn't just stereotype a whole nationality of people, It wouldn't address people, in that kind of way en masse. But then what you've got is at the end, Titus 1 verse 13, what Paul says, this witness is true. So what he's saying is, this statement that one of their own prophets, so it's probably one of their poets, but possibly also a prophet, has said that Cretians, and of course this is the inhabitants of Crete at this time, are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. He's saying, yeah, this is true. And so what he's saying is, Titus, when you go to Crete, or when, I'm not sure if he's going or he's there already, but he's saying, you need to be aware of this. And I was thinking, is that right? Is that how, does the Bible do that? And then I remembered, do you remember in the Gospels, and you can look yourself in Matthew 11, it is 21 to 23. I kind of broke it down to the basic essentials here. But Jesus himself says, woe unto thee, Chorazin, woe unto thee, Bethsaida. For if the mighty works which were done in you were done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago. And thou, Capernaum, which are exalted unto heaven, shall be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. So Jesus here is preaching against whole regions of people, and he's condemning these whole, not just individuals, but a whole region of people, saying, well, you didn't have respect for the miracles that I did when I was there. And if other people had been there, other, cities that God had destroyed, and I'd done what I'd done in front of you, they would have repented. They would have come to God. So he's actually condemning whole regions of people. But I think it goes further than that. So whilst we're told that God is no respecter of persons, he's not exalting one particular race or nationality above another one. Everybody in that sense is equal before God. You know, we're all created by God. We all have an opportunity to believe on Christ and find salvation. I really believe that. Nevertheless, God does actually speak through the scriptures in how he deals and how he characterizes certain people. And I think this is really fascinating. Now there's a phrase, and I think also this kind of teaching is probably quite timely considering what's going on in the world at the moment. And some people I've seen this on kind of memes and stuff like that, where people have said, God doesn't see colour. Have you seen that? God doesn't see colour, meaning the colour of people's skin. But I actually think that's not true. I think it is true that God is no respecter of persons. So he doesn't favour like white people over black people or black people over white people. But it's not the same as saying he doesn't see colour. Because in Jeremiah 13:23, the Bible says, can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? So just think about that for a moment. Can the Ethiopian change his skin? So what he's saying is the Ethiopian, that black man, let's say, is known by the colour of his skin. It's like one of the first things you notice. He's black, right? And it's sort of saying, I think it's implying that just as much as when you kind of see the spots on a leopard, you know it's a leopard. When you see the Ethiopian's black skin, yep, he's an Ethiopian. He's from that particular race. You know, he's not from another race. That in a sense, his blackness is part of his identity. You know, and that's what I think we sometimes miss, and particularly kind of white, liberal, Western Christians miss, is that actually a person's colour, the colour of their skin, whilst we don't discriminate against them for the colour of their skin, we have to be aware that they come from a different background, maybe have had different experiences, different cultural experiences in life, and that it sort of shapes their psychology as well, how they think and how they act. And that's really what it's saying in Titus, isn't it? That the Cretians, those inhabitants of Crete, have a particular cultural mindset. That you know, not everybody is the same in terms of how we respond to things. I mean, I can sympathise, I can empathise with a black person, for example, growing up in England, but I will never truly know what it's like to be a black person growing up in a largely white environment. You know, I haven't got that experience. I haven't got the same culture, haven't had the same kind of family upbringing that they have, and so I've got probably a different kind of viewpoint than someone who's grown up in that culture and bringing that with them would have. And again, you know, think of something like, which is very relevant at the moment, the coronavirus, right? And how that has affected different countries. And you know, he's saying that it was particularly bad in places like Italy, right? Because one of the reasons that was given was because the culture in Italy is very family orientated. There are large families, many of them from Roman Catholic background, right? So large families, and a lot of their socializing is done around the table. You know, if they prepare a meal, you know, someone's kind of cooking the pasta, somebody else is somebody else is, you know, slicing the garlic, and the whole family gets together and they kind of make the meal together and they all sit round together and eat it together. But saying somewhere like the Scandinavian countries, like say Sweden, it's a different kind of culture. The Swedes leave home at quite an early age. They're more likely to kind of live on their own. Socially speaking, the housing is much more spread apart and not as kind of densely populated. So these things have had an effect on how the coronavirus has spread in these different cultures. So there are differences in cultures on how we're brought up and the values that we have and even how we live, and that creates a different kind of perspective. And Paul himself talks about this different perspective really clearly, I think, in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Let's have a look at it. It's fascinating stuff, this. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. So 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 22. For the Jews require a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. But unto them which are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God, and the wisdom of God. So you can see straight away he's saying, look, this gospel is a stumbling block for the Jews who are looking for a sign. That's how their culture, their religion has prepared them. That's how they think God works, in signs. But for the Greeks, they're not like that. To them, it's just like foolishness. It's like, well, where's the wisdom in this? Because they've come from two different cultural backgrounds, right? But it's saying, but unto them which are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. So for those who are willing to lay aside that cultural baggage and say, okay, I'm just going to listen to the call of the gospel, then, it's salvation. So I thought that was really interesting how a national culture or perspective can get in the way of the gospel. It can kind of be like a bit of a stumbling block. And then many different, I'm sure as I'm talking, you might even be thinking of different nationalities, different cultures that you know of, and the kind of problems that you hit with them. And we've all got them, we've all got that kind of baggage. But this is really what Paul is saying to Titus is, look, when you go and sort these churches out in Crete, you're going to experience some cultural problems with the Cretians, right? And actually these are quite well known issues. I did a little bit of reading up on this, and there was a poet in the ancient world called Callimachus. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but anyway, and he wrote a poem called Hymn to Zeus. So in those days, there's no TV, there's no internet, so everybody's into like reading or literature, poetry. This is how you kind of entertain yourself. So this is quite a well-known poem that he wrote, and he was quite a well-known poet, and he uses this line in the poem: Cretans, that's people from Crete, are always liars. So I'm not sure what he would rhyme that with, but anyway, that was a popular view. People would say, oh yeah, Cretans, they always lie, they always deceive. And in fact, it gave rise to, I think, do you call it a verb when it's kind of to do? So it gave rise to this verb, to cretize. Okay, oh, you're cretizing. To cretize was to deceive. So that's how kind of infamous that culture was, that they were just kind of lying and deceiving. Again, I'm not saying, well, that's what people from Crete are like. I'm saying at Paul's time, infamously, that was how the culture was, that they would just kind of very easily lie. And so this is what Paul is warning Titus again. He's saying, look, when you go there, these are one of the issues you're going to face as you try and sort out the churches. Now, these are generalizations, okay? And they might be unpopular, but actually the generalizations are quite frequent in the Bible. So for example, turn to John chapter 1. And you'll know this one, John chapter 1, verse 11, where it says that Jesus came unto his own, that is, he came to the Jews. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, even to them that believed on his name. So that's a generalization, isn't it? He came to the Jews and they received him not. But we know that, all the early church were Jewish. So obviously some did. But again, John is generalizing, saying, by and large, they didn't receive him. So this kind of, this generalizing is something that the Bible indulges in. It's something that's useful in order to know how to deal with the culture that you're trying to bring the gospel in, and you're trying to so for example, in the UK we have a culture of individuality, don't we? And so it's like that's sometimes quite a challenge trying to get people to think more corporately. Quick example, all the kind of contemporary Christian songs you can think of, worship songs and so on, how many of them have the word I in them? I worship you. It is very much, aimed at the individual in worship. Whereas if you go back a bit further, it's more we, onward Christian soldiers. So I'm not saying it's exclusively that, but there was more of an idea of being part of the church, being part of a group of people, being part of that kind of movement. And it's moved more away to like the individual's experience in worship. So there are changes in culture that reflect issues and problems that you might have in churches. I think it's just fascinating. So Paul goes on to say that, and these are really strong phrases that he uses, that Cretans are evil beasts. And what that means is, think of a beast like an animal. And so you put those two words together, evil and beasts, they signify in the Greek a people who are wild and dangerous. So we've got some pretty unfortunate characteristics, haven't we, of the people of Crete in Paul's time, that they're known as liars, they're known to deceive, and also that they are wild and dangerous. And I don't know if you know this, Crete was the home to an ancient culture called the Minoans, and there's a legend that you might have heard, the legend of the Minotaur. Right? And the Minotaur was like half bull, half human. It's a legend, right? And I think it's like he had like the head of a bull and the body of a man. But maybe that's something to do with the characteristics of the nation. I don't know. I'm just guessing that maybe that reflected some of the wildness of the people. One thing I do know is there's when you see these ancient kind of vases and artifacts from ancient Crete, they had some ceremonies where they would kind of throw themselves over the top of bulls. They would like jump over them as part of their kind of religious ceremonies and rites. And so maybe this is partly where this is coming from. This idea of that they're these kind of wild and dangerous people. After the Minoan society, they were settled by the Mycenaean Greeks, who were a warrior culture. So again, you've got this idea of these people who are really quite dangerous, quite possibly violent, and Paul using these phrases like they're like beasts. That, in other words, they're like animals, which could also imply a lack of moral restraint. So what he's doing, he's saying, look, Titus, I'm going to familiarize you with some of the problems. This is why it's all negative. Sure, they had a lot of positive things you could say too, but he's saying these are the problems you're going to encounter, Titus, when you sort out those churches, when you try and organize them. And one of the main problems is the kind of mindset of the people. They have this kind of fleshliness. They're like animals almost. They can be dangerous, they can be wild. And then he says this kind of phrase, it sounds funny because how it's rendered in the King James, slow bellies, meaning they're idle. It literally means they're lazy bellies, just kind of lazy as well. So on the one hand, they're wild and dangerous, but also there's just kind of like laziness. And do you know what it reminded me of? Because I was thinking, well, how can you sort of like be wild, dangerous, violent, but at the same time just like lazy? And it reminded me, I watched a documentary a while ago on on gangs, like these teenage gangs in sort of South London and places like that, these knife gangs and people, and there's a side to them where they're always up for a fight, they're quite dangerous and violent, but then there's another side to them where they just can't be bothered doing anything. They won't work, they won't so Nathaniel just sent me a message saying, reminds me of Jack. He can be quite lazy. These knife gangs, they're sort of like violent and aggressive, but at the same time they're like, you're getting to do anything. Nah, I'm just chilling. They don't do anything. They're just, hours and hours of complete non-activity, and then going out and being violent and antisocial. So this is the character of the people that he's got to deal with. They're idle, they are lazy bellies, so indicating that they're slothful but also gluttonous. They sound rather unfortunate people, don't they? But they're fixated on the flesh. And often people are fixated on the flesh. There can be a lack of moral restraint, but there can also be an indulgence in things like gluttony. And again, the Bible has much to say about this. Let's have a look at Philippians 3. Oh yes. Yeah, so Philippians 3, yes, Philippians 3 verse 18, for many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things. Whose God is their belly. And I think it was William Tyndale who calls it belly wisdom. In other words, their way of thinking about things is always earthly and fleshly. It's always down to their earthly desires, whether that's gluttony or drunkenness or fornication. It's like that's their focus is on earthly, temporal things. They've got no focus on spiritual, heavenly things, but they're just drawn aside by these kind of physical things. And because of their sort of national character, if you like, their focus on fleshly things, their lack of discernment, their lack of wisdom, he is concerned that they are going to fall prey to those, we looked at it last week, who subvert whole houses. So he's talking, wasn't he, last week, not last week actually, it was the week before, but when we were reading in Titus 1, we talked about verse 11, those who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not. And Paul's concern is that they're going to fall prey to these people who are teaching false things. And so what he's really saying to Titus is, you need to kind of come along and intervene here, because if you don't, they're going to be dragged away by these people who are subverting whole houses. And if we come down to verse 14, he says, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. So Jewish fables, literally fanciful stories. Now I started my early Christian life in Pentecostal and charismatic churches. Let me tell you, there's a fair bit of fanciful stories go around in those churches. Unsubstantiated, no evidence, no biblical background, but these fanciful stories are so exciting, so amazing to hear. Wow, is that what happened? But what he's saying here is, beware of these Jewish fables. And who's going to be bringing Jewish fables? Well, we looked at it last week, verse 10, where Paul tells Titus to be aware of deceivers, especially they of the circumcision. So remember I said this is the kind of the Judaizers. And it's kind of ironic, and perhaps could even be a play on words, that Paul is well, maybe not a play on words, but a play on terminology, where Paul is warning against those who are so focused on their flesh, and then he's bringing in this idea of the circumcision, which of course is to do with the flesh, literally. So there could be a kind of reference that he's making there. But these are the people that Paul is warning Titus to be aware of, and to be aware that the mindset, the culture, the characteristics of the Cretians could make them susceptible to that kind of false teaching. It could appeal to them, and so need to be really careful about that, because as we looked at last week, and as Jude says, these are people who have crept in unawares into the church, and therefore could be leading people away with these Jewish myths or fanciful stories and the commandments of men. So that's the other warning, isn't it? Be careful those who bring the commandments of men rather than bringing the word of God. And let's just look at that, Matthew 15, where Jesus himself warns about it. Matthew 15. So Matthew 15 verse 8, Jesus says, "This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoureth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me," and here it comes, "teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." So that's what the Pharisees were doing, wasn't it? And the religious people, they had these commandments of men, these commandments, Pharisaical commandments, and taking those commandments and putting them in place of the laws of Moses. So like often the commandments that have been made by the elders and so on were in contradiction to what God has said in his word. I mean, you still get this today. People make rules in churches that are contrary to what God has said in his word. And so Paul is warning, saying, look, be aware of this. Look out for people who do this, and avoid them. So Paul's put him in the picture really, as to what the problems are that he might encounter in the churches in Crete. So now we need to know, well, if that's the problems, how does he deal with it? What do you do when you've got people in your church who are slow-bellied, idle, who are gluttonous, who are dangerous, who have a lack of moral restraint? So it's really like, how do you deal with sin in the church? And I thought it was fascinating because Paul's solution is not complex, is it? It's quite simple really. Verse 13, he says, "Wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith." And I thought, gosh, that's the cure. That's the cure for people who receive false teaching and therefore are led astray by it, is that they should be rebuked sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. Again, it's like so common in churches that I've been in, where you're told, someone's in sin. Well, you just need to kind of be understanding. You need to be compassionate. It's like there needs to be a certain level of tolerance. Maybe even treating the backslider as unfortunate, maybe even a victim. All right, they've been watching these videos and they've got these funny ideas about a particular doctrine, or they're leaning in this particular direction. Just pray for them. Anyone who heard people say that, just pray for them. Don't say anything to them. Just let them carry on in their sin, but just pray. Make sure you pray for them, and God will sort it out, and God will deal with it. But it's so different to what Paul's saying here. Can you see that? Paul says, rebuke them sharply. That's not just like a rebuke, is it? It's not just like, look, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing it. It's like a sharp rebuke. I'm not sure what the words would be for that. I don't think I've really might have sharply rebuked one person, I think, in my life. But it's like, wow, you know what? A rebuke is what's required. It's not like, you know, go away and pray for them. It's not like let that fester or let them share that false doctrine with all the rest of the congregation so that everyone's now confused, but it's okay because you're praying about it. You know, there's a time to pray and then there's a time to rebuke, actually. You know, there's time to sort of say, right, well, no need to pray. I just need to tell the person to stop it. And that's what Paul said, wasn't it? Where he says, verse 11, whose mouths must be stopped. You know, stop them teaching all this stuff. Stop them teaching this false doctrine. And here he's saying, rebuke them sharply. So let's have a look at, I'm just finishing off now really, but Proverbs 27. I think this is a useful verse. When you're kind of stuck between, what do I do? Do I just pray for the person or do I actually rebuke them for their sin? So Proverbs 27 verse 5 says this: open rebuke is better than secret love. Yeah, open rebuke is better than secret love. So like sort of saying, well, I'll just pray for the person in secret, you know. That's how I'll deal with it and just pray that God will sort it out. And it's saying, no, that kind of secret hidden love, that's no good. If it might require a rebuke, and that means that you might have to actually get your hands dirty. You know, you might have to plonk yourself in the middle of a difficult situation and say something. You know, and that is kind of real love, isn't it? Where you're willing to kind of do that. You know, I mean, like say, like it's like in marriage, right? And let's say your other half is doing something that's driving you nuts. You know, I mean, thankfully, Kirsty and I obviously never have those moments. But like they're driving you mad, and it's like either you just say nothing and it builds and builds and eventually ends up in a big argument, or you just go to the person and say, right, you know, I just need to talk to you about this. And it's not a comfortable feeling, is it? If you've had to do that, it's not a comfortable feeling. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. But you know it has to be done. And it's part of your commitment to the other person, right? That you're going to be honest and open with them. And it doesn't always go well, does it? You found that? It doesn't always go, maybe it's just me and you, Kirsty. But it doesn't always go well. But it's better that it's sort of out there and that it's said. And I think it's probably the same in churches sometimes, that, you know, better that things are said, really, and that it's dealt with than kind of festering on it and kind of seething away under the surface. So I don't buy the say nothing, just pray approach. You know, I think it exposes the degree to which the world has influenced the church, actually. I think that's more our kind of common culture, where the only thing you say is via, you know, Facebook or something. It's from behind your laptop. It's much better kind of speaking face to face with people. And to take what Paul is saying to Titus here, while we say nothing and do nothing, whole households are being turned from the truth, you know. And so yeah, it is better to when, particularly when, and this is primarily it's talking about a national characteristic, but it's primarily talking about false doctrine and how the characteristics, their cultural characteristics, are making them more susceptible to that false doctrine, more, what would you say, vulnerable to that false doctrine.